Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Daria Hammer podcast. This episode is going to be life-changing. Now, the only way it's going to be life-changing if you sit and listen until the very end, as this is going to be a very in-depth conversation that will affect not just your health and well-being, but the way you look at your body and the way you look at your lifestyle and the way you look at medicine today. So today's guest, Dr. Nicola Conlon, she's a molecular biologist specializing in the study of cellular aging. She has a very unique background since after a career in drug development, she went into the private sector and founded her own company called Nuchido Laboratories to deliver disruptive innovation in the field of aging and rejuvenation, as well as health span. So a little bit to her education, she received her PhD in physiology and molecular biology from Newcastle University, which is home of one of the largest institutions in aging research in the world, and certainly the largest in Europe. And so I'm really excited to pick her brain on what is it that we can practically um, do today, like literally starting after listening to this podcast, practically adopt to improve our health, and not just as far as longevity, meaning living longer, and we're going to talk about those definition, but also living healthier, which is, I think, more interesting, at least for me personally. Um, so, um, Nicola, welcome to my podcast. And before we, uh, dive into the science, now you left a very lucrative job um, in drug development and decided to take on the risk of becoming an entrepreneur and create your own supplement company. Like, can you please explain to us, because this is such a huge shift, there must have been something compelling that you have experienced in during your career and education that made you do that. Could you kind of walk us through that moment where you made that decision and how did it come about?
Yeah, that's a great question because when I made that decision, a lot of people around me said, "You're crazy." Like, what are you doing? You've got this amazing job that you've studied so hard to get, working in drug development, you're leading projects, designing drugs that are going to help people. But actually, I'd become quite disillusioned with the world of drug development. Well, for two main reasons. The first was that it just takes so long for any scientific breakthrough to actually get translated and go all the way through to the clinic. We've got this huge translational gap. Different people say different numbers, but you're looking at around 15 years from things being first discovered in a
Hmm.
in a scientific academic laboratory, and then actually going all the way through all the development, the trials, and getting it to a person that can actually benefit from it. So for me, that's just crazy. That's some of the things I was working on. We're never going to help anyone anytime soon. And secondly, the other thing I noticed was that a lot of molecules that worked really well when we were testing them in our experiments were not drug molecules. They were molecules that were natural molecules, things that were found in foods and nutrients and, things that were already regulated as dietary supplements. And in some cases, they were outperforming some of the molecules that we were going to invest hundreds of millions in. But companies aren't interested in them if they can't patent them because they're not drugs or they're not, and chemical molecules that people don't already own or know about. So, I was looking at this situation where I was like, hang on a minute, we are got all of these molecules that actually work well in fixing what we want to fix in the body and addressing the problems we want to address. But we're putting them in the bin and we're not doing anything about them, even though we already know they're well tolerated, they're safe. And just because of commercial reasons, which I understand, but we're not going to pursue them. But ethically, this is wrong. We should be doing something with this. So that was the moment that made me sort of decide, hang on, why don't I start a company that does all of the same research, development, testing that a drugs company does, But rather than look at the drugs, let's look at the things that we can get into consumer products and get to market quickly so we can actually get this science to people in the meantime.
So, um, from a business standpoint, um, it is like this podcast is also somewhat about business and entrepreneurship, even though today's topic is mainly going to focus around health and wellness. But um, what was the compelling moment? What was the moment where you decided to let go a lucrative job, a well-paying job, and because there's a lot of people that currently work at their job, and there are some ethical battles going around based on what they experience and what they see. But because they get paid well, they just kind of close an eye on it and just go with it and kind of shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm just working here. And as long as I'm getting paid and putting bread on the table and can feed my family, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I don't want to stir up any controversy. But for you to make this shift, what was I know you told us you saw that the naturally occurring molecules in nature in our body are much more effective in treating or more so preventing issues. But what was that compelling moment for you? Was there any specific incidents where you said, you know what, this is it. I'm out.
I think a mixture of things. I think, firstly, some people do just go to work for the money, and that is all that matters. For me, I've never really known what I wanted to do. I always followed a career path of something that I was interested in, and that's how I was led down the scientific route. I was fascinated by the
Hmm.
body. I've always wanted to do something that, was purpose driven. And it's not about just putting the food on the table. It's about we're trying to make things better in
Hmm.
the world. And so I think part of it was just a deep rooted ethical principle within me. And secondly, experience in that I had saw my grandparents suffer terribly when it came to aging. And now I was looking at things in the lab that actually could have helped them. And aging is something that affects everyone. It's something, it's not, some diseases only affect specific people, but aging is something that can really, really significantly limit a lot of people's lives and potential. And for me, it was simply a case of I don't want to end up like that. I don't want my parents to end up like that. I'm sure many, many other people who have elderly relatives do not, wish there was an alternative. And here we are looking at alternatives that are going to go in the bin. So let's do something with them.
Yeah, it doesn't look like aging has even started in your case. So I'm kind of I was kind of curious to see what was for you the compelling moment, because usually we have to associate significant pain and suffering with our current situation to kind of change,
Mm.
or someone near and close to us to like in your case, your parents, to see that we don't want to see them suffer. And then if we see we can do something about it, we then do that. Now, for the listeners, in case you're listening and thinking all of this is kind of like fluff talk, it's just well-being, and I want to frame it properly because it's very important. It's something that personally, after 15 years of medical education and 15 years of practice, having grown up in a family of physicians. My dad was an internal medicine physician. My brother's ophthalmologist. So all my life since I was born, I was in touch with the medical field. And so I had this almost blind trust to the practice of medicine. And when someone came to me, even started the discussion with an alternative type of um, medicine, which involved not medication or a specific diagnosis, I literally rolled up my eyes and walked the other way. And I just thought they're crazy. And we often, that's the tribalism in us. And I just didn't even listen to them until I started aging myself and until I saw my father becoming um, old and his diagnosis is still unclear, but I really think he has some sort of dementia or Alzheimer's. He has lots of long-term and short-term memory, mostly short-term memory. And so I looked back at his lifestyle. Of course, he grew up in the 50s and 60s where everybody was smoking. I remember I used to go to his office and there was in his consultation room, there was literally an ashtray and he was smoking while he was talking to his patients about health. And but that was, for those of you who are listening and you're too young probably to even remember that, you might have seen it in an old movie from the 60s. Even athletes were smoking. And so you look at that, where how far we've come, which is pretty significant. But when I started turning mid 40s, I'm 51 now. And when I started in my late 40s, these little aches and pains started coming up that I never had for absolutely no reason. I would wake up in the morning and I would get out of bed and I was like, why is my knee hurting? I didn't do anything yesterday. I would play tennis and then my shoulder was hurting and then I had a labrum tear and it's not like I played in Wimbledon. I just played on the court outside for an hour with a friend. And so everything was starting to hurt. Um, I felt bloated. I just felt tired. Around 10, 11 a.m., I just felt tired. I felt I need some sugar to get me going. And then that helped me for an hour. And then afternoon, I was even exhausted. I couldn't wait to go home. And it was this vicious cycle. And I thought, maybe I'm getting old. Maybe that's what people say when they say you're getting old. And so I went for my annual physical. I love my primary care doctor. She's amazing, but she pretty much said, "Yep, uh, your blood tests are all good, and you don't need to come here. Just come back when you're 50 for your colonoscopy, and that's it." And I walked out of her office thinking, like, but I'm feeling like I don't I'm not feeling myself. I'm tired and she's like, yeah, maybe, just get some rest. Maybe you're working too hard. So thought, well, she is true. She's right. I'm working a lot, so maybe that's it. Maybe I should get more sleep and all of that stuff. But it's kind of the stuff that we accept when we kind of accept the aging aspect because we're told by our doctors that that's how it is, right? So until my shoulder pain didn't improve, and I was at a casual dinner with friends, and there was this orthopedic surgeon. His name is Matt, and I just ran by him. I said, "Look, I hate when people and parties or dinners they come and ask me medical question, and I hate to
Mhm.
ask you. I don't want to bother you, but man, my right shoulder is just for 2 years, it's just not getting better. I can't play tennis anymore. I can't do the activities. And my knee is like bothering me. I had an MRI and it just shows chondromalacia, which is just um in a fancy medical term for aging cartilage. Um, so I literally thought I had a meniscus tear, but none of that. I said, what can I do? And so he introduced me to, which we're going to talk about in detail, to NAD and NMN, which are some supplements that we're going to really delve deep into in this conversation. So if you really want to know about it, please stay tuned until the end of this podcast. Um, so I blindly, because I was so desperate, I said, where can I get it? And right then and there at the dinner table, I went online and I bought myself NMN powder. And then when I went home, I started doing research. I wanted to know what's the science? Is it just some BS? Um, and that's what got me on this path. And that's what got me into the science. And that's where I had literally my awakening. And so, couple of interesting facts for the audience before I hit you with a million questions, Nicola. I just want the audience to know that if we look at the past 100 years, we've come a long way when it comes to lifespan and health span. But something changed about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, where we haven't really progressed much. As a matter of fact, in most Western countries, and specific, I can speak for the US, the not only the health span has declined, meaning the rate of chronic disease has increased, not decreased, with all the modern medicine we have, the rate of chronic disease, and we're talking about diabetes, heart disease, neurologic disorders, Alzheimer's, and even psychological and neurologic disorders in children, like attention deficit disorder, a lot of neurological disorders. All these chronic diseases have actually increased in the past 30 years. So, um, and the lifespan, interestingly, in the United States has regressed by about, I think, 1.6 or 1.8 years in the past 20 years. Um, and so that to me was shocking to look into because no one talks about it. I was in awe of our modern medicine. I was always raving, even to my patients. I said, "Hi, we're lucky to live in this time and age where we have all this modern medicine." But little I knew it's really to treat chronic disease, is just waiting for disease to happen instead of preventing it. So, some facts here: about 93% of Americans today live in metabolic dysfunction. I'm pretty sure it's very similar in the UK. Most developed countries are kind of similar, but I think Europeans are healthier just because you don't have the amount of this ultra processed foods that we have, just because they're banned in Europe. So ultra processed food in the US, I don't know if you knew, Nicola, make up to 70% of our calories here in the United
Wow.
States. I mean, by ultra processed, I mean just the definition of processed versus ultra processed. For example, yogurt is processed, right? Which doesn't mean it's bad. So processed food is almost everything we eat is processed. Milk is processed. But then ultra processed is if you mix it with sugars, with maybe some colors, and that's what I mean by ultra processed.
Yeah.
Our sleeping hours have decreased by 2 hours in the past 100 years. So we're sleeping less. That's a biggie. Um, and 2 hours of sleep is really significant. And we're going to get to that. And we are outdoors about 7% of our time in a 24-hour period. Only 7% of a 24-hour period we spend outdoors. So, and the other thing is also we live in like a thermal neutral environment, which means our temperatures is fully um, controlled by air conditioning to like 70, 72 degrees, whatever that is, and we don't have the adversity of hot and cold anymore. And we've become more sedentary, meaning the average person does not get in 5,000 steps. So those are the facts, and they are certainly correlated to the fact that our health span is decreasing and our lifespan is decreasing. And then you look at the blue zones in the world where the number of centurions is 80%, and then you look at their lifestyles, they don't have any of these problems. Now, for the audience, Nicola, I want you to explain the meaning of longevity. Also, how do you differentiate lifespan with health span, and what should we rather focus on and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I first got into the world of longevity, shall we say, this was 10 years ago now. And back then, not many people, lay people, shall we say, were talking about this. If I had a conversation with the average person about what I did and spoke about longevity, their immediate response would have been, oh, like this is a load of rubbish. Like, why would we want to live longer? Why would we want to be in a care home longer? Their immediate thought was that longevity is all about just living longer.
Meaning suffering for
And
a longer time.
exactly, suffering, unfortunately, we do have this
Yeah.
problem where our lifespan is way longer than our health span. So, lifespan, simply the number of years you will live according to your birth certificate. Your health span is actually the proportion of that lifespan that you actually live in good health. And that is the bit that longevity science is really focused on improving. It's about how do we live these long lifespans that we now have, thanks to modern medicine and sanitation and all those other great things that no one would ever argue were a bad idea. But how do we take that lifespan, but actually live the majority of it in good health? Because at the moment, we really have this gap. And, I think for a woman, for example, in the UK, their lifespan on average is 83 years. Their health span, on the other hand, is only 64 years. So that is a huge proportion. That's 19
Wow.
years where we're expected to be in poor health at current rate.
It's almost like you
And
can't wait to die once you're have chronic disease. You just hope you die a least painful death.
yeah, so a lot of people will say, well, oh, I'm happy to live my life. As soon as I get ill, shoot me kind of thing. That's really common, something awful that people say. They're like, I don't want to end up like my parents. Like, if I get like that, do not let me live. That is the reality of it. That is what a lot of people will say. So the moment that you start talking about potentially doing something with longevity, people always assume that it's all about just making us live for more years, but don't start to consider this idea of being in better health. And the main reason for that is that for a long, long time, everyone, including scientists, have believed that aging was an inevitable process, that it was something that was programmed into us, that once it started, you literally couldn't stop it. So if you ask people about aging and what it is, they will just say it's this natural thing, it's a fact of life. There's nothing you can do about it. And that is the best way that people can rationalize and sort of comprehend something quite awful that is actually, they just say it's just a fact of life because it's not nice.
Well,
No, there's no secret that a lot of the aging process is not nice.
well, how do you explain it then? Because there are people that say, well, if it was true, how come my doctor doesn't talk to me about this?
Mm.
Can you explain that argument? Like
Yeah.
why?
The whole issue there is the translational gap between what is happening at a scientific level and what we are proving as scientists versus how long it actually then takes to get that through into the clinic. And I think that is the main issue here. So for example, when I first got into this field 10 years ago, even for me as a scientist, I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like how have I not heard about this? And this science is new,
Yeah,
this is not something that has been around that long. For a long
sure.
time, it was even argued within the field of longevity whether it was even possible
Mm.
to slow the aging process. But now the research coming through and all of the science really does prove that aging is a modifiable process. It is not a one-way street. And I guess one of the main pieces of evidence that really demonstrated that aging was reversible was when scientists really started to look at something called our biological age. So our chronological age is just the number of years that we've been around on the planet. Our biological age, on the other hand, is the age at which we are on the inside at a cellular level. And it's now found that you can measure this. So scientists have worked out multiple different ways to measure this biological age. And the really interesting thing was that when they worked out how to measure this, quite often, many people's biological age on the inside did not match their chronological age. So, for example, you said you were 50. You may measure your biological age and it could be more like age 40, or on the bad side, it could be like age 60. And for scientists, that was really exciting because it proved two really important things. The first thing it proved that was that aging is not fixed, because for a long time it had been argued that it was this fixed program
Yes.
thing that you could not do anything about. But if that was the case, then your chronological age should always match your biological age, and everyone should age at the same rate internally, but they don't. And
Mhm.
that shows us that there's things that are going on inside of our bodies, specifically in our cells, that are either speeding up the aging process or slowing it down. And if there's something that is speeding it up or slowing it down, it means, first of all, it's not fixed. And second of all, there are things going on in our cells that we can possibly target to manipulate that aging process. The second thing it proved was that you could actually measure aging, because again, another huge area of controversy for people is, well, you're telling me that you're going to slow aging, but how on earth do we measure this? Like, you can't do a clinical trial
Sounds
where,
like science
you know,
fiction, doesn't it?
yeah, you wait and see how long it takes for people to die or something. It's like, how do you measure it? But again, this was a way to measure it. And
Mm.
since these sort of tests have become available and this type of science is being deciphered, it's meant that there have been huge advancements in the aging field, because we are now looking at what is happening in the cells to drive aging. And also we have ways to measure to see if interventions are actually working.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. When I first heard about it, just like you, it sounded to me like science fiction because all my life I was told completely arbitrary comments like 90% of what happens to you is based on your DNA and 10% is just based on the environment. And you just accept these things because if someone that you respect says that, you take it as a fact and you don't question it. And in reality, it's probably the other way around. And I mean, there is decade-old research now from yeast to mice to dogs to horses, and now human trials going on where we actually have proven not only we can slow down the biologic aging, we can actually reverse it, and better even, we can cure chronic disease and even, for example, blindness in mice. So when you hear this stuff, you can't help it to get curious and to question what traditional medicine has been postulating for decades. And I think we live in a time where the internet and social media has made the science so accessible to the layman. And there's all these companies, direct to consumer, lab testing, and biomarker analysis, where anybody can take the health in their own hands. You don't just have to, and I'm not saying, not to trust your primary care doctor, but if I break an arm or I come up with an illness, I'm going to go to my doctor. But when I'm healthy, my doctor is not going to do anything about it. But I don't want to get ill. I don't want to get sick. I don't want to have chronic disease. And the beauty about today's world is we can take it in our own hands. The problem, though, for most is there's so much information out there that people get confused. So
Yeah.
that's the number one uh, hurdle or point of friction in people taking initiative. The other one is people are scared to know what's wrong with them. I have these conversations with my patients, and especially with the ones that haven't seen a doctor in years. I mean, I'm talking about a 50 or 60-year-old that hasn't gone to the doctor in 10 years. And when I just simply ask why, they're like, well, I'm not sick. I only go to the doctor where I'm sick. So and then when I ask a little bit more questions, I find out that they're actually scared to know if there's anything wrong with them, and they just don't want to know, and almost like turn a blind eye, and they just don't want to know. And that's, I think, why people are more hesitant in pursuing or taking control of their own health, until there is something bad that happens either to them or a loved one. That's when they get really scared and feel, okay, I have to do something. And
Yeah.
so I don't know what your experience has been with trying to get through clinicians. I don't know if you can maybe share some experiences you had in conversing with some doctors that completely not made fun of your science, but actually refused even to look into it. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Oh yeah, like a lot. There's been a lot of times in the past where I have to say that a lot of medical doctors would outright dismiss anything that I spoke about. You could kind of see them going, "Oh yeah, that's really interesting. Lovely to meet you, but mm."
Why do you think that is?
I think it is because this is such a radically different way of thinking about aging. And again, we have always been led to believe that aging was nothing you could do anything about, really. And therefore, you just had to deal with the consequences as they came up one by one. And this is flipping everything that we've ever been taught, whether as a medical professional or just the average person that's going to visit their doctor. This is flipping it all upside down on its head. So the real change in the way of thinking is this idea that, first of all, we call it healthcare, but really it's
Mhm.
not healthcare, it's sick
Sick
care.
care.
You just hit the nail on the head before. We only go to the doctor when we're sick. And actually, the body is extremely good at masking a lot of illness and failures before they start to appear on the outside as symptoms. And that means that usually by the time we're at the doctor, it's something that is quite hard to fix. And there's already quite a lot of damage done in the body that probably could have been preventable. The other thing is that when you think of aging, or I guess when you think of diseases, the most common diseases and illnesses that people are going to the doctors for, the majority of them are age related.
Mhm.
So our healthcare spend over age 50 just goes through the roof, and then the last few years of a person's life is when the biggest spend for healthcare happens. It's all age related. If you look at the major diseases, the heart disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer, cognitive decline, dementia, all of those things, the biggest risk factor above everything else is your age. That doesn't matter for diet, smoking, anything like that. Age is your biggest risk factor for the onset of the major diseases, cardiovascular, cancer, dementia. Your risk of all of those goes up exponentially with age. So a big shift in thinking within the longevity space and with the scientists in this field was, hang on a minute, at the minute, what we do is we look at all of these diseases individually. We research them all as separate institutes, separate scientists, have separate conferences, separate ways to deal with them, separate departments in hospitals. Yet the biggest risk factor for all of these things is actually our age.
Mhm.
So if you turn this around a bit, why don't you say, well, is actually age the root cause of all of these different diseases? And actually, all of these different diseases are symptoms of aging. And therefore, if they're all symptoms of aging, well, isn't aging actually the disease? And why don't we target the root cause and target aging? Because if we can do something, even a little something about the aging process, then it would have an impact on all of these different age-related diseases in one go. And for a long time, that was thought of as pretty radical,
Mhm.
really, really crazy. But now all of the evidence coming out shows, in fact, if you can slow the rate of cellular aging, you can actually reduce the risk of many different things that are leading to these age-related diseases, and therefore ultimately improve health span across the board. So rather than just say, for example, eliminating cancer. So if you think of all the money that goes into cancer research, even if cancer never existed anymore and we cured it, everyone would still get dementia. Everyone's still going to get heart disease, cardiovascular disease, and all the other age-related problems. So this is a completely different way of thinking about it. And now, when I had this conversation with people, maybe it's like, 5, 6 years ago, people were like, okay, it makes sense, but still weren't convinced. But now the data, the evidence, the discussion, the conversation around it has become so great, it can't be ignored anymore. And in fact, it was probably last month, I went to a conference, and this was in the UK. And the UK is very different to the US. I'd say the US actually, despite what you may think, has a lot more preventative healthcare than the UK because we have the NHS and everyone just
Yeah.
relies on that. I went to a conference and it was full of GPs, general practitioners, all saying, do you know what? We are ready to listen to this. Something has to be done. It is not sustainable the way we're going. And
Amazing.
now actually we are going to start looking more at preventative care. And, they were going off their own backs to this conference to say, I am sick of not being able to offer this type of thing to my patients. The science is really credible. It's really strong. How do I just learn it myself so I can start incorporating it into my consultations?
Amazing. So it's very refreshing to hear that because I, as a anti-aging doctor and surgeon who mainly performs cosmetic and rejuvenative surgery and procedures, I feel ethically almost obligated, which I have actually changed the course of my practice. I feel ethically obligated to have these conversations with my patients, where I think this is a primary care's job. And here I am talking to my patients about it. And the reason why I feel that we in the aesthetic industry are so well positioned is patients that come to us, they care about their appearance, they care about their well-being, and they care therefore about their health, and they're ready to make lifestyle changes, and they're not happy with the status quo, and they want to go through a transformation. They want to obtain their self-esteem and self-confidence back. They want to be more active. And I see it on my patients. Once they do a transformation, let's say I do a facelift on a patient and literally they look 15 years younger, it motivates them to also change their lifestyle, to go out more, to make more connections with other human beings, to be more active, to change their diet. And now I have made it part of my practice and consultation to educate them about everything that I'm learning still every day, but whatever new thing that I'm learning in the longevity and anti-aging science, I share with my patients. And the excitement, the relief that I see in my patients is so overwhelming. It motivates me even to go further because it's almost like they're thirsty for this information. They're longing for it and they don't know where to get information. They feel overwhelmed trying to do their own research. They get bombarded with all this information. They don't know how to interpret it because they don't have the scientific knowledge and background. And it's very hard to digest this type of information as a layman. I mean, because you really need to understand the hallmarks of cellular aging to be able to wrap your head around the fact that, look, we actually can reverse our biologic age. You can become younger. And that is not science fiction. And so I want you to walk us through several key hallmarks of cellular aging and as they relate to what we perceive clinically and how it makes us feel and look clinically. And I know you've published an article in the PRS a couple of years ago as it relates to skin and anti-aging, which is a great article. And I wish I had read it then and not later. But again, my awareness wasn't into this field at that time, which shame on me. But I want you to walk us through some of the hallmarks of cellular aging. I know we're going to get a little bit nerdier here, so this is, but also maybe explain it in a way that someone with just a basic high school science can understand and wrap their head around it.
Yeah, so the hallmarks of aging has been one of the, I guess, one of the key changes in the field that has shown us what is actually causing aging at the cellular level. And I think for the average person, one of the real mindset shifts that needs to happen is that traditionally, when we think about anything to do with aging, we always think about how we look. We
Mhm.
always think about the appearance, the visible signs and symptoms of aging, maybe how we're feeling. But what we actually need to understand is despite the way we feel or the way that we look due to aging, actually everything that is causing the aging process is happening deep within our bodies at the cellular level. That is where it is all happening. And this means that whilst we've really focused on treating aging at the surface level, actually, if we really want to have a major impact, we need to now start thinking about treating aging from the inside at the cellular level. And this is where the hallmarks of aging comes in, because these are 12 things that scientists have discovered seem to go wrong in our cells and drive the aging process. So these particular hallmarks, as they get worse, aging gets worse. And if
Mhm.
you make the hallmarks better, aging slows down and even reverses. So there are 12 different things, and you're right, we can't go into all of them because that would be totally geeking
Right.
out for hours.
That would be another
But
podcast. Maybe we would do like a geeky podcast.
yeah,
Well,
maybe, but let's just think
yeah.
about, just think about use skin for an example. So how do these things that we see on the outside with age relate to
Yeah.
what's happening on the inside? So one of the most common hallmarks of aging is DNA damage. So we know in our cells they all have DNA, and the DNA is the blueprint for the cell to teach it to do everything that it needs to do. It's its instruction guide.
Hmm.
And constantly we're getting damage. So this could be from our diet, from pollution, in the case of skin, from UV, from the sun. It's constantly damaging this DNA. And when we're young, our cells are very good at repairing this DNA damage. In fact, we get around 10,000 pieces of DNA damage in every cell every day, and our bodies just deal with it and
And
repair it. We
and
have this army,
this is from the day we're born, by the way.
yeah, constantly.
Yeah.
This is
This is
crazy.
not for old senile people that get DNA
No,
damage. This is from the day we're born, our DNA gets hammered.
hammered constantly, and we have literally an army of DNA repair enzymes that is going around looking for damage. As soon as it spots some damage, it's repaired before we even know that it's an issue. And when we're younger, we're very good at doing this. It just happens. But as we're older, this DNA repair seems to get turned down. And this is one of the hallmarks of aging, the fact that our cells can't repair this DNA anymore. And when it comes to skin, a real classic sign of a lack of DNA repair is hyperpigmentation and the brown spots that we get on our skin as we get older. Because there's a certain type of cell in our skin called our melanocytes, and they are the skin cells that produce the melanin, which gives our pigment in our skin. And when they get too much DNA damage, they suddenly have this reaction and start overproducing the pigment. And that's why we get this classic sign of pigmentation. So that is probably one of the most famous hallmarks. The second one that I'll probably would be a good idea to discuss is something called senescence. Now, this is actually linked to the first hallmark.
Mhm.
So senescence is when a cell gets so much damage that the cell goes, oh my goodness, there's too much to repair. Even our army of repair proteins is overwhelmed. We need to just shut this down before this cell becomes dangerous. It may become cancerous. It may go rogue because this DNA instruction manual is not working anymore. So we just need to shut the cell down. And rather than get rid of the cell, this dangerous rogue cell out of the body, it's much quicker and easier for the body just to tell it to go to sleep. So effectively, the cell becomes what we know as senescent. It's a sleeping cell.
Now
In
that
pop,
has a negative effect on our body. Can you kind of tell us what happens, what those senescent cells actually do in our body?
yeah. So for a long time, it was thought that these cells just stay asleep and don't do anything and they're harmless. But we now know that they actually secrete a lot of inflammation. And they're often referred to as zombie cells because they're like these sleeping cells that are actually giving off all of this toxic waste. And this inflammation is actually another hallmark of aging. So, chronic low grade inflammation in our bodies is a key driver of the aging process. So, when you look at these senescent cells in skin, not only are they giving off inflammation, which is actually degrading our collagen and elastin, which leads to, lines, wrinkles, loss of elasticity, but also they're sitting there taking up space and they're not making our own natural collagen like
Right.
they should be, which is why our collagen production goes down. We also know that this inflammation is causing things like redness and rosacea. So very quickly you can see that, for our skin, a long time we've just said, oh, wrinkles, lack of collagen. But it's like, yeah, but why is there a lack of collagen?
And it's
Why is it suddenly
and
gone?
and it's funny, people are so obsessed with taking collagen, and they're just everybody's so focused on ingesting raw material instead
Mm.
of tackling the root cause and letting your body take care of business. And it's fascinating at cellular level what our body is capable of doing if we know how to let it do what it can do instead of throwing more raw material at it in a cellular functional um, capacity that it can't really work. It's almost like you have a factory, you don't have enough factory workers, and you keep bringing raw material with trucks to the factory and hoping you can increase your production. And
Hmm.
yet, your factory workers are striking or are quitting, and you don't have anybody that can actually run the factory. And that's what's happening as we age. Uh, and this cellular inflammation that you discussed that affects our skin is what affected me, my muscles, my tendons, um, my brain, talking about brain fog, even vision. It affects every cell in your body. And, within the context of this podcast, of course, your skin is the most important part, but really, your brain, your eyes, and your skeletal muscle function is really what disables you to then get into that vicious cycle of becoming less and less active and then accelerating all these hallmarks of aging. And I think we can disrupt it now, and we're going to talk about how we can disrupt that pattern. So, so that's one thing. And so, what's another hallmark?
So another one that is probably quite a famous one is mitochondrial dysfunction, which sounds really complicated, but it's not. It's basically in our cells, we have these energy powerhouses that literally take our food and convert it into the energy that our whole body needs to function. And these
Mhm.
powerhouses are called our mitochondria. And as we get older, they start to dysfunction. So they're kind of like a power plant that is become old and it's not as efficient anymore. It's leaking toxic waste, and really it should be getting decommissioned and closed down, but it's not. It's still running, trying to churn out energy, and it's doing it in a very wasteful manner. And
Mhm.
that's exactly mitochondrial dysfunction. Our power plants in our cells just don't function like they used to. They're not producing as much energy. So we start to experience things on the outside like tiredness, fatigue. In terms of the skin, you see reduced skin cell turnover because the cells literally don't have the energy to do it. You also see, and again, an increase in inflammation because these toxic power plants are giving off free radicals and other damaging things that are then causing problems in the cell and damaging components and giving off inflammation that then goes on to affect the rest of the body. So that is another really key hallmark of aging. And I think looking at the hallmarks, there's 12, but I'd say DNA damage, senescence, mitochondrial dysfunction, and inflammation are probably the ones that are most well studied and are probably the things that are to date the things that we can probably do something about in terms of trying to promote our health span in everyday life, shall we say.
And this is very interesting. I hope you've been really listening carefully to these three main hallmarks, because remember in the beginning I told you I started feeling tired every day. I had all these aches. I felt like um, you know, obviously my skin was aging, but I've been really diligent. I have my own skincare line and product I've been using religiously for 10 years. So luckily my skin hasn't been aging too bad, but that's an external thing that can be even augmented internally, which is probably more effective. And I've proven it to myself over the past year by just changing my lifestyle, taking certain supplementations that we will come to and talk about, that has significantly, like exponentially improved not just my skin, my hair, like my nails grow faster, they're not
Mhm.
brittle anymore. All my aches, the entire inflammation in my body is gone, and I'm measuring it with biomarkers. I use Inside Tracker, and every 3 to 4 months I get my biomarkers measured. And we're going to talk about some of the biomarkers that are essential to measure, because I think unless you measure an outcome and a change, you really won't know what you're doing. You will be doing things randomly. And I think that's another strategy that has to be implemented. And there's so many direct to consumer um, um, apps and sites that you don't even need your doctor. You just go to a lab, they send your biomarkers to that company, and they analyze it for you, and you can keep track and you see how you've improved based on your lifestyle modifications and
Yeah.
the supplementation and your diet. And so That's something that I've been doing actively in the past year and significantly reduced my biologic age. And so talk to me about, there's so many um, measures that we can use to measure our biologic age that gets confusing. There's so many different metrics. What is like the most common and most reliable metric where we can really measure our biologic age? So for someone that wants to know, hey, am I doing well? So I listened to Dr. Conlon and Dr. Hamra. I'm all in. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to turn back my biologic age. Is there anything that they can measure it? Is there any marker, biologic marker that they can measure how well they're doing?
Yeah, so there are two main ways that you can measure your biological age. Well, there are three really. So the first one is something called measuring the length of your telomeres. Now, this is not one that I'd recommend,
Hmm.
but I'm going to mention it because if you start Googling it, it's
Yes.
probably going to come up. Um, and you're basically telomere shortening is another hallmark of aging. So in your cells, you have your DNA, and when you look at, a Google image of DNA, you always see these little chromosomes that look like little squiggly things. And on the ends of these chromosomes, they have basically your telomeres. Now, telomeres, you can describe them as being like the plastic bits on the end of your shoelace to stop your shoelace from unwinding. Well, a telomere is kind of like the same thing for your DNA. It's on the
Hmm.
end of your DNA to stop the DNA from fraying or unwinding because you do not want that to happen. Now, as you get older, it seems that the length of these telomeres decreases. So there are some companies that will offer telomere measurements, and they will look at the length of your telomeres and use that to predict how old your cells are. And that's probably like biological age measuring sort of generation one, where it was the best that we used to have, but now there are way more superior measurements. The issue with this type of measurement is that it's usually very specific to the cell type. So if you're measuring telomere length in your blood, then it's only kind of telling you the age of the blood and not the rest of the tissues.
Hmm.
So this is when the next sort of generation of biological age testing came out. And this is something called epigenetic testing. So again, if you think of your DNA in your cells, every single cell has the same set of DNA. Yet cells are very different. You could have a skin cell, or you could have a liver cell, or a hair cell, even though each of these cells is genetically identical. Okay. So the way that a liver cell becomes a liver cell and a skin cell becomes a skin cell is via a process called epigenetics. And this basically means that our cells turn on different patterns of genes to become different things. So the same thing happens as we get older. So if we were to take a sample of cells from a young person, what you would see is that their cells generally have a very different pattern of genes switched on to a sample of cells out of an older person. They will have a much more older pattern of cells switched
Hmm.
on. So, pattern of genes switched on. And this is what we call epigenetic drift. So, our cells seem to drift from having a very specific set of genes switched on when we're young that are associated with things like low inflammation and lots of
Hmm.
repair and less damage, drifting all the way through to having all those beneficial genes sort of switched off and actually bad genes switched on, things that are driving inflammation and turning down repair. And if you measure this epigenetic pattern, you can predict the biological age of the person. So epigenetic age tests have become really common. Again, like you mentioned, these are things that you can order online. You can do it as a finger prick blood test. The other one to measure is something called your glycan age. And this works in a very similar way to epigenetics, apart from it's not measuring the patterns of genes. It's actually measuring patterns of sugar molecules on your immune cells. And in a very similar way, when you're young, you will have a very specific pattern, which is
Hmm.
anti-inflammatory essentially. And as you get older, you seem to have a very different pattern that becomes way more pro-inflammatory. So again, this is another test kit that you can get, and it measures biological age.
Yeah, I think the glycan age is probably one of the most practical and relatively accurate ones that anybody can do starting tomorrow. And I'll put the link down below in the
Mm.
podcast for people if you're interested, because it's good to have um, a basis by which you can measure your improvement and then go from there. Now, um, are there any now we talked about all of these hallmarks of aging. So if someone is interested to make a change today, are there any supplements that one can take? Is it as easy as taking a pill and then everything will be fine? Or what do you recommend people to do if they're really interested? What are the main key elements of their lifestyles that you recommend to change? And then also as it relates to supplementation and dietary modification.
Yeah, so I think the first key thing to point out is that actually lifestyle has a major role. So we touched on this earlier that many people think aging is down to your genetics, and
Mhm.
this is a really common misconception that, how well you will age is just based on the genes you
Yeah.
inherited. People
My
will say,
mom's got
"Oh,
great genes. I got
yeah,
my,
I've
yeah,
got great
yeah.
genes. You look so good. It must be your genes." It's absolutely not. In fact, there's different percentages in different studies, but in some studies, it's been shown, like huge population studies, it's actually been shown that actually 90% is your lifestyle and the other 10% is your genes.
Amazing.
Other studies estimate it's more like 70-30, but it's between, 70% and 90% is actually lifestyle. So that's
It's
huge.
exactly the opposite what we were told for decades, which was for me a paradigm shift in the way I think about aging. And this is for me was probably the most life-changing and attitude-changing fact that in all my medical career that I've ever encountered, because it's
Mm.
almost like someone telling me, "Hey, the Earth is not flat, it's round." And I actually see through a telescope. I'm like, "Oh my God, you're right, it's actually round." So for me, that's how it was.
And the reason for this, and the reason that we really now understand why our lifestyle can have such a big impact, is because of its link with epigenetics, which I just explained, is this idea that
Mm,
even though we've got our genetics, which is set, actually the genes that are switched on and off are not set. They're changing all of the time. And actually, it's our external environment that is influencing which genes are switched on or off. And it's our lifestyle that is literally affecting our biology and how our genes are expressed. So that is why our lifestyle can have such a major impact. And just to think about those things, so I have a supplement company, but I am the first person to say that supplements are not the first thing that you should be doing. There are so many other things that you should be doing first that can have such a major impact on your health and how well you will age. The first thing is your diet.
yeah.
So, diet is so underestimated, and diet influences our health span, our longevity in two ways. The first way it influences us is that literally food is medicine. And this is one thing that I say time and time again when people question why I left my job in drug development to start a supplement company.
Mhm.
I always say to them, your body has no idea what is a drug, what is a nutrient,
Yeah,
what is a supplement. Actually, they all have a very powerful biological effect in the body. Your body isn't going, "Oh, it's a drug, it's not a drug, so I'm not going to let it do
right.
anything." Actually, our diet is full of compounds that are constantly influencing our biology. So if you are eating the ultra processed American diet that is beige and full of sugar and full of all sorts of unnatural things that are harmful, that is going to be actually aging you. It is going to be increasing inflammation in the body. And also, it's depriving you from a lot of the phytochemicals, the nutrients, the beneficial molecules that are actually in plants.
Hmm.
And then all the fruits, the vegetables, the herbs, the spices, we know that if you can flip from the standard American diet
Hmm.
to more of the Mediterranean diet that is full of good fats rather than, polysaturated fats, and actually also full of lots of different plant molecules, you are going to be getting nature's medicine cabinet. All of those beneficial compounds that are actually switching on the good genes and the good pathways in your body.
Yeah, I think if I could pick one dietary, um, if I could give one dietary advice, or if I could blame one element in our diet that causes the most damage and significantly accelerates aging at cellular level, is probably sugar. Is
I was just going to say, can I guess which one it's going to
yeah.
be?
I mean,
Yeah.
I know, look, people are listening to us and we probably sound like a broken record. But it's almost like one of those things that's, you know how something is right in front of you, it's so close that you don't see it. I think that is, and because everybody talks about it, people are like, oh God, and you have conversations like, no, I don't eat any sugar. And then I
Mm.
realize people don't know what in our food consists of sugar. People don't know. They don't know that all these starches that we eat, they're actually sugar. They're just sugar molecules that are attached to each other. And so our body breaks it up to sugar, and that attaches to all of our proteins and pretty much puts them out of commission to the point that they can't do what they were designed to do, and hence our biologic age increases. And so when you could, if you could cut one element out, is the sugar, and people don't want to sacrifice because that's where they get their dopamine. I mean,
Yeah.
you tell a drug addict not to, get their fix, they're gonna fight you. I mean, that's why drug addicts go and steal or even kill people just to get to their drug, because they're addicted to it. And sugar is probably the most addictive element in our diet today, and that's why it's so difficult for people to get rid of it. And that's probably the number one element that makes us sick and is the root cause of all chronic disease.
Completely agree. It's so pro-inflammatory. It causes glycation in our body, which it causes which is where sugar becomes bound to proteins like collagen, elastin, causing our arteries to stiffen, our skin problems. My one piece of advice to anybody who, doesn't believe that sugar is an issue, or, it doesn't really want to admit that maybe they're eating too much sugar, is wear a continuous glucose monitor. You see the people
Yep.
with the little discs. Wear a continuous glucose monitor for 2 weeks, and you will entirely change your relationship with food. Because the problem is, a lot of the eating that we do is mindless.
Yeah.
We're just constantly, we see something and just go, oh, I'll just have a little snack. And we're told we have to eat every 2 hours and whatnot. Every time you put something in your mouth, your body has to go through this huge process of dealing with it. And we don't see, because the body just deals with it and gets on.
Hmm.
But if you can actually see in real time when you put that biscuit or that cake or whatever in your mouth, thinking, oh, I'll just have it as a little snack with a coffee or whatever. And then all of a sudden you see in real time on a graph, oh, it's going up. Look at my sugar in my blood. It's going through the roof and then it's crashing. And then, oh, look, I feel hungry again. What a surprise. I've had a blood sugar crash,
Yeah.
and you suddenly realize the effort that your body has to go to every
Yeah.
time you're putting something in your mouth. And that makes you really reconsider, maybe I'll not have the snack in between breakfast and lunch. Maybe I'll, wait till lunchtime. Maybe I won't have that mega bowl of
Yeah.
sugared cereal for breakfast.
I think that brings me to the biggest anti-aging advice that I can give the audience is that, first of all, these sugar spikes, they cause our insulin to spike with it. And, especially one of the hallmarks of aging is that we lose insulin sensitivity. And that insulin sensitivity is another aspect that, that's why we get type 2 diabetes. And, your doctors tell you, well, I guess you're 50 years old or 60 years old. It's just part of aging. Here, get some metformin,
Mm.
which metformin, by the way, is a great drug, is a great anti-aging drug. Some people just are taking it for anti-aging purposes. But it's you shouldn't accept it. And I think one of the um, one of the strategies that anyone can implement today to work towards anti-aging is avoid these snackings that you're talking about, Nicole. I mean, I
Yeah.
used to be a biggest snacker, and it's almost like I I prided myself of being a snacker that I don't eat large meals. And now I basically have one, maybe two meals a day. Um, you know, um, I do time restricted. I follow a time restricted diet because that really gives my body a chance to clean up the mess, all these senescent cells. Science has shown, as you put a little adversity and stress into your cells, not stress as far as working harder or not sleeping, not that type of stress, but
No.
stress at the cellular level. That adversity is shown that is actually has an anti-aging effect and increases a level of a certain molecule in our body that's called NAD, which is one of the products that your company actually, not the NAD itself, but the boosting aspect of the NAD that your supplement is actually targeting. And so we're going to talk about, I want you to explain what your supplement does in that regard, but I also want the audience not to miss on this important piece of information that you can boost your NAD, which is in charge of the energy in your body, which is actually produced in your mitochondria. You can increase that through exercise, diet, and everything we just talked about, sleep, stress reduction as far as mental stress, not as far as cellular stress, because cellular stress, again, is adversity for the cell that is anti-aging, whether it is temperature changes, heat and cold. Everybody has heard of the cold plunges or saunas that improves your health, and it is an anti-aging strategy. But as far as a cellular level, you can actually um, take a supplement or help boost the energy of your cell using supplementation that you can combine together with lifestyle changes to double down on it, which is what I'm doing today. And I've seen significant changes in my mental health, in my energy level, in the inflammation, in my sugar levels, and that caused me to be more active. And instead of going to the gym once a week, I'm in a gym every day because I have the energy. I'm not tired around noon or afternoon. And in the morning, I'm as sharp as a tack, and I can't wait to tackle the day. So tell me about NAD and tell me what the problem is as we age with that, and what strategies your research has shown to be most effective in addressing that issue. Is something that people can literally start tomorrow.
Yeah, so NAD was one of the areas that I just got so excited about when really starting to look at all of the research in terms of how we could impact cellular aging. And basically it's a natural molecule that's, already found in every single cell in our body. And it's really important for hundreds of different reactions. But the two things it's most important for are firstly, energy production. So those mitochondrial power plants,
Mhm.
NAD literally helps to take the food that we eat and do the energy conversion process to make our energy. And secondly, remember I said about all of those army of repair proteins that are going around fixing things in our cells continuously? Well, it seems also that NAD has a role of acting as a fuel to basically power a lot of those repair processes. And what's been found is that as we get older, NAD seems to decline in our cells. And that means as NAD goes down, we have less energy production. So we start to experience the things like brain fog, tiredness, fatigue, lack of stamina, reduced skin cell turnover. And also, we have less repair going on because there's less NAD to fuel all these repair processes. So we start to see an accumulation of cellular damage. And then this starts to cause all of these hallmarks and these problems that we were talking about earlier.
And that
So
decline
science
is significant. Can you tell us?
Yeah, it's really significant. So it's estimated that it halves every 20 years, and this is from birth. So even by the time you're 20, you've lost half your levels of NAD. Then by the time you're 40, that amount is halved again. And
Mhm.
it's no surprise that this is around the time when we really suddenly start to feel
Yes.
that we're not invincible anymore. And actually, we are starting to feel the signs and symptoms of aging. It's really heavily correlated with this decline in NAD. So scientists said, right, well, we've got this molecule. It's keeping all of these, our energy production switched on, our repair up, and when it goes down, it causes all these problems. So what happens if we just don't let it decline?
Hmm.
And basically, to cut a very long story short, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of scientific publications now that show that if you can keep NAD topped up or restore NAD levels, it has all round benefits from not only the cellular level, but all the way through to all round health span
Hmm.
benefits. So when NAD is boosted in cells, we see an increase in all of the repair processes and energy production. We see an actual positive impact on all of the hallmarks
Yeah.
of aging. And so far, it's one of the only things that has been found to have a positive impact on all of the hallmarks at a whole body level. We're seeing in animal studies and now even human studies, we're seeing improvements to things like cardiovascular function, reduction in inflammation, and even reversal of biological age.
And that's something that what I alluded to has really changed my life, and just in a very short period of time. It's explain people what your research has shown, that in only in what, like 28 days, you've seen significant changes by people taking these NAD boosting supplements that you're discovered.
Yeah, so when we realized that NAD was so important, I started looking at how people were, using this information, and it became evident that there were some supplements out there
Hmm.
that were designed to boost NAD levels. But this goes back to a comment that you made earlier. A lot of these supplements were actually what we know as precursors, things like NMN or
Hmm.
NR. They're precursors to NAD. They're like the building blocks that our body uses to make NAD. And when I started looking into the reason why NAD was declining in our cells, I couldn't find any evidence that suggested that the reason NAD goes down is because our body doesn't have enough of these precursors, these building blocks. Actually, all of the evidence shows that NAD declines because the factory in our cells,
Hmm.
literally, that takes the precursor and turns it into NAD, that is what declines with age. So for me, it was kind of one of those moments where it was like, hang on a minute, these products don't make much scientific sense.
Hmm.
So why don't we try to do this differently? Our body's very good at making NAD when it's young. It just seems to get turned down.
Hmm.
These pathways that are producing it, the enzyme that's producing it gets turned down. So let's design a supplement that has ingredients in it that actually switches back on your own natural NAD production. So that is exactly what we designed our NAD boosting product to do. And again, because of my background as a scientist, I was very keen to prove that this is not snake oil and this does actually help people in reverse biological age. So we did a full double-blind placebo-controlled crossover study, which is like a gold standard in
Hmm.
terms of clinical studies. Not many supplements have that type of study. And we proved that not only does it boost NAD levels, but also it works by actually switching back on your body's own natural NAD production. So it fixes the root cause of the problem. We showed it reduces inflammation, it reduces glycation, and also we used glycan age and measured biological age and demonstrated that it does indeed reverse the biological age of cells. And this is in humans,
I
not
know.
animals,
And
not
and
cells.
and and
It's
here's
a
the
human
beauty. For
study.
for decades we had animal studies where we had shown that in animals, but there's not many clinical trials or human studies which are more increasing more, and you're one of the big contributors today. And
Mm.
so I love that now we have a metric, now we have a really standardized way of testing it where we can actually prove it. Now, I just took it before even I came across your study because I was like, I have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't harm, I'm just going to take it because I don't want to wait 10 years for research to prove something that we've proven is working in animals. As long as it doesn't hurt me, I'm taking it. So I'm not giving advice to people just taking random supplements. I'm just saying where my logic was. And when I saw this significant change in a very short, like within a month, Nicola, within a month alone, I felt it. Like I felt when I read your study, I'm like, I'm exactly like those people in your study. But of course, I optimize other stuff too. I changed my lifestyle. I cut out all the sugars. I got more sleep. I exercise more. I eat much more health conscious. I do intermittent fasting. I also take a lot of foods that have all these polyphenols. They have the flavonoids and all these molecular substrates that basically improve the NAD synthesis pathway, which is one of the basis of your supplement. So, can you talk about the two main ingredients of your supplement so for the layman to what kind of foods have what your supplement provides so that people can maybe even augment it with their diet and even get a bigger bang for their buck and more results.
So some of the active ingredients, again, if anyone looks on the back of the tub, they'll say, oh, these are, quite natural botanical type ingredients. How are these working?
Hmm.
So we have two ingredients in there that are actually designed to switch back on the cell's natural NAD production pathway. So it's a specific enzyme in this pathway that makes NAD. And we use a specific ingredient called rutin. Now, rutin contains an active molecule called quercetin,
Hmm.
and this can be found in certain foods such as apples, onions. They tend to have decent amounts of quercetin. It's hard to get the exact amount you would need to actually, have the effect, but it can be used as an additive form. We also use parsley. And a lot of people go, oh, why have you got parsley in there? That's a really
Hmm.
unusual thing. So parsley actually has an active ingredient in it called apigenin. And apigenin is an inhibitor of something in our cells called CD38, which drives a lot of chronic low-grade inflammation that actually degrades a lot of our NAD. Now, you can eat parsley to get the apigenin, but unfortunately,
Like a
you have to
truckload
eat
of parsley.
a huge amount of parsley,
Yeah,
and nobody ever would want to eat that amount of
yeah.
parsley. But
I love
having said
parsley.
that,
I would probably.
people say to us, well, why do you not just use pure apigenin? Why are you still putting it in as the parsley? And again, I just go back to the fact that these molecules, although they may be isolated in labs and turned into pure molecules that are put in supplements, they never existed
Yeah.
like that in nature, which means it's very hard for our body and our gut to absorb them in that format. If you take it in the whole food format or the extract format, you definitely get way more absorption. So
Yes.
my PhD was actually in bioavailability, which is why I'm so
Good.
particular about what sort of ingredients go in.
Yeah.
But yeah, another one, green tea. Green tea has a very powerful
Yeah.
active ingredient called EGCG. This is a catechin, and basically what this does is it inhibits some of the methylation processes that degrade our NAD as we get older. So again, just looking at all of these natural things that are already there and available that we have put into a supplement in the right combination,
Yeah.
the right amounts, the right formulation that is then proven in a human clinical trial to reverse biological age just shows that we do not need drugs.
Absolutely.
This is things that we can be doing now that actually can have real significant impact on our cellular health.
Absolutely. And for anyone that is interested to try it out, I'll put a link down below. And it's definitely worth trying. However, you should accompany this with the lifestyle changes that we discussed, or else you're just really not. I don't know what your study has looked at. Did your study look at people um, in accordance with lifestyle changes, or did they maintain their lifestyle and then just take that?
This was, we had to get them to maintain lifestyle, make no
Just to
changes. So
see if it's
it was
purely the
only the supplement. But just to sort of quickly like whiz through the lifestyle things that I
yeah.
would say, diet, we've already discussed that. That's extremely important. Exercise. I mean, it goes without saying, exercise, it's been shown in a study that those people who engaged in 12 and a half hours of exercise activity a week, show a 42% reduction in all-cause mortality. Like, there is no drug on this earth that has such a beneficial effect. You want to be looking at incorporating both high intensity interval training, that actually switches on energy stress pathways. So you were talking earlier about this idea of putting your cells under a little bit of stress. This is a concept called hormesis, and it's
Mhm.
basically the fact that many of the beneficial pathways in our cells that kickstart repair only ever get switched on if we put our bodies under a little bit of stress. Otherwise, they don't bother. And this goes back to evolution and the way that our biology is designed. It's not designed to be sitting all day at a computer having 3 meals a day and 5 snacks. It's designed to be running around, finding our food, going for periods without food. And then suddenly the body has to go, oh, no food. I need to kickstart repair. I need to not be wasteful. Unfortunately, those things aren't getting
Yeah.
switched on in our modern lifestyles. So things like high intensity interval training can really help to activate some of those pathways. Intermittent fasting, like you mentioned as well, also will activate similar pathways in the body. When it comes to exercise, muscle mass decreases by 3 to 8% per year after age 30. Muscle mass is massively linked to longevity. It's very important to maintain that.
That's where
And
most of
then
our
the other thing,
mitochondria reside.
yeah,
That's where
exactly
our
that.
energy
And
factories are.
they are, and they are, first of all, where the energy factories are, better at removing sugar and things
Mhm.
like that for insulin resistance. But also, just generally, we know that as muscle mass declines, people are more at risk of falls. And actually, falls are one of
Mhm.
the biggest killers
Yeah,
of older people, because
absolutely.
once somebody has fallen and broken a hip or whatever, then they cannot live. They can't, all of the other things, the cognitive function goes down. They can't get out. They can't be doing any other exercise. Everything then starts
I
to,
think you touched
really
on a very
decline.
important topic, which is muscle mass, is one of the things that the primary care physician doesn't emphasize enough. It's almost like we accept our physical decline. The problem is, as we get older, we lose muscle mass. Our body is less capable of creating new muscle mass
Yeah.
for two reasons. Our caloric intake that comes from protein mainly decreases. So people are not taking enough protein. And secondary, you need to do um, some sort of resistance training to actively build muscle mass to put the protein into muscle, or else the protein will just be turned into fat because you're just sitting around and you're sedentary, you're not active, and all of that is going to be turned into sugar, and that's gonna not going to be utilized by your body, and in turn is going to be stored around all your organs, your livers, kidney, heart, everywhere as fat storage. And that's what gives us chronic disease and illness. So I think focusing for anyone that is above the age of 50 and is accepting their age as an excuse or using it as an excuse to be less active, you have to do the opposite, because unless you build up your muscle mass, you will not be able to store the glucose, because your muscle is in general the biggest storage unit for sugar. And also you're decreasing the number of mitochondria that produces the NAD, which are your energy factories, produces the ATP, which is energy, what our body uses as energy. So the only way to come out of that vicious cycle, again, I sound like a broken record, you have to hit the gym, and just doing a little bit cardio is not enough. You actually have, by strength training, I don't mean bodybuilding. I just mean um, maintaining your muscle mass, and that's something you significantly lose as you age. And then, like you said, Nicola, it contributes to falls, and then also increasing your muscle mass actually increases your bone density, makes your tendons and ligaments thicker, gets rid of the inflammatory processes that happen in those parts of your body, and boosting it together with NAD boosters and proper supplementation based on your particular body, which is related to your diet and lifestyle. Supplements like, from your vitamin D, vitamin K's, your magnesium, all the good stuff that is beyond this podcast right now, that you can find enough information online. I think it's the key is really in combining all those things. But I think our job here is to explain you the processes that at a cellular level, and that contribute to improving your health span, and with that also your lifespan.
Exactly that. It's just, I think a lot of people are sick of hearing the same things like, oh, do
I
this,
know.
do that with diet, exercise, sleep. Everyone's so
Yeah.
sick of it. Like we've heard it all before. But I think now it's about looking at all of those things in a new light
Yeah.
and, understanding actually the significant impact they are having on our bodies. And then also being able to measure that these things are having an impact, being able to see that if you are changing your diet, it really is lowering your glycan age, it's lowering the inflammation, it's lowering biological age, and seeing that a lifestyle change can make such a massive impact. Sleep again, that's another thing we haven't even
I
touched
know.
upon yet. It's so important. Sleep is
How
just
many
it's
hours of sleep do you recommend to be to have shown significantly to be anti-aging? How many hours of sleep? I know there's different uh, philosophies about sleep, but by sleep we also are talking about quality sleep, which is REM sleep.
yeah.
Like if you're in bed for 8 hours, you're not sleeping for 8 hours. You're probably sleeping like maybe 7 hours or 7.5 hours. So can you talk about that? How
Yeah.
many hours of sleep do you actually get?
So I aim for seven,
Mm-hmm.
7 to 8. 7 to 8 is what is recommended. So it seems that sleep has a bit of a U-shaped curve, which means that too little
Yeah.
is too bad, but also too much is also too bad. So around 8 hours seems to be the sweet spot for most people. There's less than 1% of people that can actually get away with less than 6 hours sleep without getting some sort of health
Mm-hmm.
decline in health from it. So I think less than six, definitely not good. And even up until very recently, I think for, especially between professionals and, people, I guess, in type doctors, people that you're working with, there is almost like a thing of like, oh, how little sleep can we survive
Yeah.
on? And like, it's like a badge of honor,
Yeah.
but it's
It
really,
is.
really not a good thing. And do you know what? There was something that I saw recently, which actually, I mean, it really shocked me, but then it didn't. But it was that the World Health Organization have actually classified shift work as a potential carcinogen because of
Have
the,
they?
the the so much evidence of how much shift work ruins our sleep and has such a
Hmm.
profound impact on health that the World Health Organization have literally labeled it.
Actually, I'm not surprised. I'm actually surprised to hear that, especially coming from a World Health Organization,
Yeah,
which, you know, um, in the past decade, I've kind of changed my opinion about them, but that's a different topic. It's that it makes sense because the one thing is not about how much sleep you get, but also when you get it. Meaning,
yeah,
you should wake up at the same time every day and go to sleep at the same time, because your body is really depending all the functions in your body based on the hormones that get released. They're really based on the circadian rhythm that
yeah.
you don't want to change it. It's not like you sleep and wake up the same time during the week, and then on weekends you completely disturb it. That significantly alters the pattern, and with that your cellular aging.
Yeah, exactly that. It's about the timing of going to sleep, and that is just something that people don't appreciate. Going to bed and getting 8 hours sleep between 1 a.m. and 9 is very different to going to bed at 10 and getting 8 hours sleep. And if you one day you're going to bed at 10, the next day you're going to bed at 1 a.m., your circadian rhythm, which is meant to be a 24-hour cycle, is suddenly either becoming compressed or stretched. And then that knocks everything else that it's controlling, out of sync as well. So yes, having, good bedtime routine. So trying to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time is very important.
Non-negotiable.
Things, sorry,
That's non-negotiable. So
non-negotiable.
let's put that in the category of the non-negotiable. So sleep, 8 hours of sleep and the same pattern, non-negotiable.
Yeah, yeah,
What's the second one?
exactly. The second non-negotiable, aside from sleep, is definitely the diet. Making sure that you're getting 30 different plants in your diet each week. And this can, this sounds, people go, oh, that's so difficult. It's not. Have a fruit salad with 5, 6 different fruits in. Have a actual salad with different types of leaves,
Yeah.
herbs, spices, nuts, seeds, even chocolate, a bit of dark chocolate. It's coming from a plant that is
Hmm.
got powerful antioxidants in. You can very easily get 30 different plants. And again, that is shown to help reverse biological age.
as
So
as
that would
as
go
well as
to
protein. So protein, a lot of
protein. Yeah,
there's all these vegan movement and such, but there are essential amino acids that meaning the amino acids that our body doesn't make, is incapable of
yeah,
making, and they come only from animal sources or eggs, red meat, fish, chicken, specifically leucine, glycine, and they're important for your brain, they're important for your vision, they're important for your skin. So if you are vegetarian or vegan, you have to make sure that you supplement those essential amino acids one or the other way. Otherwise you're going to get really sick. So protein is important. There is the current recommendation of protein to me is way below what one should be taking, which is kind of like the just base survival for your body's survival, but definitely not optimal, which is optimal. You're supposed to take about 0.8 gram per pound of protein. So that's important. Otherwise, you can't build muscle mass and you won't have any energy to do your exercise. So sleep, diet is non-negotiable. What's the third one?
exercise.
How many how
Unsurprisingly,
many
yeah.
hours a week would you say is important?
So the study shows 12 and a half, but the reality is that for someone doing nothing, anything is better than nothing.
Good point.
Again, studies have shown that, people don't even do any
I
steps.
know.
Even getting 4,000 steps a day has been shown to improve cognitive function.
Yeah.
I mean, versus someone that does nothing. So doing something is better than nothing. But, absolutely try and, just make different choices. Think about getting out for a walk at lunchtime rather than sitting. Try to get to the gym, try to mix up gym, not just doing cardio, which a lot of people do some resistance training. It's really important, as we've already
I think
mentioned.
to that point, I had a separate podcast a couple of years ago with a neurologist who is an expert in brain health. His studies actually showed that walking 1 mile a day increases the size of your hippocampus by 40%, which is in charge of your memory and preventative for Alzheimer's dementia. So 1 mile a day, that's nothing. The definition is interesting. I was shocked to hear that the definition of someone that is sedentary is less than 5,000 steps a day. That
Yeah.
equates to roughly 2.7 miles. And unless you have a dog or something that you have to walk 3 times a day, you're not going to get in
No,
5,000
you have
steps.
to think
So,
about
and that's
actually
the
going and doing
and
it.
that's the
Yeah.
one factor that is significantly associated with all-cause mortality by a significant number. I don't know exact number, but that alone, the definition of sedentary is less than 5,000 steps a day. And that doesn't
Mm.
even include your resistance training, that is even more important as we age, since we lose muscle mass as we age.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's the third one. Is there a fourth or fifth one?
So
Non-negotiable?
my fourth would be, so we've talked about good stress for the body, the
Yeah.
kind of what doesn't kill you, make you stronger stress. But
Hormesis.
the other side of
Yeah.
stress is psychological stress,
Mm.
the bad stress. And, a lot of people will say, oh, I'm not stressed, I'm fine. But stress is very relative. And, lots of people are living in chronic states of stress
Yeah.
and they just are used to it.
Yeah.
And actually, when you are stressed, you have elevated cortisol, which is incredibly pro-inflammatory. And this is a real issue that people are chronically
Yeah.
stressed, have a lot of inflammation, and this is accelerating aging.
Hmm.
So even in people that don't think they're stressed, even doing things like meditation, breath work, which again is something that a lot of people have perceived as being quite woo woo. And,
I know.
oh, I'm not going to meditate. And, oh, what difference is that going to make? But actually, there are literally studies now showing that meditation can actually reduce inflammation in your body and also extend the length of your telomeres. So just by sitting meditating,
Yeah.
you and calming the brain and calming the body, you can actually reverse two of the hallmarks of aging.
Hundred
There we
percent,
go.
and that's where I think cynicism can kill you. And I think one of the things about mental health is not often talked about, and it's almost seen as a sign of weakness if you admit it or do anything about it. And but it's in our society, it has been changing, and that's a good thing. So mental health is one of the big stressors, probably if not the biggest stressor, especially in the Western world that is fast paced and we put everything onto ourselves and just blame others, and then let the external facts of life like really affect us in a terrible way. And stress has been therefore associated with on all-cause mortality and cancer because it
Yeah.
significantly increases inflammation in our body. And this is science, by the way, guys. This is not like us, like this is not opinion. This is true
No, this is
science.
not
Yeah,
theory.
this is
Yeah.
not
And I
theory.
think
For those of you who have,
as
yeah,
for me as a scientist,
yeah,
everything that I
yeah.
talk about is not theory. There is science to back it up. In terms
Hmm.
of the stress, there was literally a study done that showed that acute traumatic um,
Yeah,
episodes, so things like surgery, things like
yep,
pregnancy, even they classified as a traumatic episode, increased biological age,
yeah.
and this was reversible.
I
So that is the key thing that is
I
reversible.
can't tell you every time I take a history on a patient that suddenly has an acute autoimmune disease, whether it is skin related, whether it is system related like lupus. Um,
Mhm.
there was always a preceding stressful event in their lives, like that shocked the system, and that's how our body responds,
Yeah.
and it just puts our immune system out of array, and these things happen. So it's not fluff talk. Meditation is not like holding hands and singing a song. Is really affects your health. So that's a fourth one. Is there a fifth one?
Do you know, I think they would be the best ones. They would be my go-tos. Obviously I also take NAD
Sure.
supplement, but I
I
think
was
for
going
a
to
lot
say
of
to that
people,
point, my fifth
yeah.
non-negotiable, which is what you just mentioned, is optimizing my biomarkers through supplementation, meaning supplements that are deficient uh, in my body based on what I'm eating. And then I use those biomarkers to improve my diet and lifestyle. I look at them as signs, but while I'm doing that, I'm supplementing them. And we're talking about stuff like vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin K, magnesium. I actually take ashwagandha for just reduce my cortisol level, just because the nature of my work is very stressful, even though I have do include more mindfulness in my life that in order to reduce my stress that way. And a bunch of other supplements. I think I take about 12 or 13 different supplements together with my lifestyle changes, and partly also because I'm experimenting. I'm just following to see which one affects my biomarkers. But I think to conclude, the lessons we learned from this conversation is you can't just change your life with supplements. You have to make lifestyle modifications. However, I think our science has reached a point where we can augment all of those non-negotiables, um, being smart about our health and using current science that is inequivocably, undeniably affecting our health through boosting our immune system and turning back the biologic clock. So, for those of you who have heard about NAD, and I mean, people are getting infusions, injections, and all kinds of stuff because it's not very bioavailable. I love your approach to it to boost the enzymes and the substrates that actually enables our cell, which is an amazing ecosystem that actually can produce the NAD on its own if we help it out. I think that's a much smarter approach. And if you want to take NMN, which is something I do, but it certainly won't be the only thing that you should take, as we just discussed, that your ability to turn NMN into NAD decreases as we age. So you need some sort of boosting agent. So I will put the link down below for people that want to try it out. There is going to be a discount code if you want to try it out for the first time. And I think, what is it, like 30? Is there 30 tablets they take one a day, or how does it work?
So it's 6 capsules a day.
6 capsules a day. So
So
when
six,
should they take it, in the morning
180.
or in the evening?
We would recommend taking it more towards morning, midday, if possible, just because
Yeah.
that sort of fits within your natural circadian rhythm of NAD. But we recommend taking it with food as well.
I actually, when I started, I mistakenly took the NAD boosters and M in the evening, and I literally couldn't sleep. I was wired. I was like up, ready to go to work. So I take it in the morning myself,
Right.
or early afternoon or midday. And um, Nicola, thank you so much. I know this was supposed to be an hour. I knew that it's not going to happen in an hour. There's just so much to discuss, especially to frame it properly for the audience so they understand what we're talking about. I'm really so grateful, not just for you coming onto the show to help educate my audience, but also for the research that you're doing. I think we need more people and scientists like yourself that don't think about drugs and rather think about how we can improve our lives. And I think we've arrived at a time in society where people are ready. I think 10 years ago would have been difficult. I think today there's not a patient I talk to is not ready to implement these types of changes, and the distrust towards medicine has significantly increased in the recent years, especially after COVID, and people are ready to really grab the bull by the horns and just take their health in their own hands and be in control of their own faith, and the evidence is out there. So thank you so much, Nicola, and I hope we meet one day in one of these conferences and meetings, and I will definitely have you back on this podcast because there's so much stuff that we didn't have time to discuss. It's going to be a little nerdier one, a little more one that is more specific into the basic science of what we mentioned today. I think it would be great to do a part two for anyone that's interested. And thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I think we definitely could have spoke for another hour or even two,
Right?
even. Um, I just hope it's inspired some
Yeah.
people to think differently about aging because it really is the future. So thank you so
No,
much.
thank you so much. And yes, have an amazing weekend, Nicola.
You too. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.